Okay, and looks like we're almost ready. And Wendy, of course, is currently the president of Wendy Warr and Associates. And today she's going to tell us a little bit about tautomerism and chemical information management systems.
I'm sorry for the subliminal ad at the beginning. That wasn't meant to be that way. Yeah, I suppose I should say briefly, I'm a management consultant, I'm a market analyst, but I also have a background in chemical information management, and today I'm not talking business, I'm talking a fairly technical subject, tautomerism. This arose from an article I had prepared for the Journal of Computer-Aided Molecular Design. Same title, same author. And if you want to deplane at this point, it's published, so you go away, read it. You'll read it nice and slowly. I talk too quickly. It's a perspectives issue devoted to tautomerism in molecular design. Most of the papers are computational chemistry, they're about ligand preparation, they're about docking. I was asked to do this paper, a pragmatic paper, about cheminformatics, as opposed to drug design and docking and so on. Just about reached. So I was asked to talk about chemical information aspects. Tautomerism has an effect on registration procedures, constructing your database. It has an effect that you have to decide what tautomers to store. Do you store one? Do you store them all? It has an effect on exact and structure search. And incidentally, exact search is basically the same as registration, novelty checking, duplication, and so on. But tautomerism has a definite effect on substructure search. And there's also the question of depicting your results after a search. Which tautomer do you show? Okay, I started this survey being lazy and knowing nothing about tautomerism. I contacted about 50 vendors and said, will you help me? And you'll get an acknowledgement. And these are the vendors I approached. We'll go through them fairly quickly. You'll see there are 28 of them, and if you're frightened that I'm going to address all 28 this morning and you'll get no lunch, don't worry. I'm going to pick out some of them. Who can guess which one I will pick out at the end? And you have to give me my full half hour because ChemAxon's right at the end. Okay, so I talked to all those companies. Not included in the paper are the companies who either don't know what to do with tautomerism or who didn't bother to reply, and they are as follows. I did get an answer from J&J, but it was Dimitris's own impressions, not how Johnson & Johnson's system works. Biorad, I had no answer. CDK, I got an answer too late because he's just got a grant to do tautomerism. E-molecules never replied. They told me to talk to Modgraph, and Modgraph sent a reply saying they didn't want to talk to me. Symbiosis never replied. Tripos never replied, so nothing in the paper about them. Sadly, John Irwin didn't reply either, so I don't know how zinc goes. Okay, before I actually talk tautomers, I'm going to teach grandma to suck eggs. I'm going to tell you about chemical structure representation. You all know this, so we do this quickly. It all begins with Mr. Morgan, who actually got his algorithm from a Mr. Gluck at DuPont. And this is the algorithm that canonicalizes a connection table for you to store. In fact, the one that is most used outside chemical abstracts is the MDL, now CIMIX, now Excelnix, or whatever connection table. Some of us use smiles. Some of us are still smiling this morning. What is worth noting about smiles is there are lots of smiles. You could smile on the left side, you could smile on the right side, you can smile in all sorts of ways, and our smiles, alas, don't meet. We don't shake hands like the parties in Britain. We all have our own versions of smiles, alas. So smiles is not standard, except insofar as the great thing about standards is the number of them. So this is one of the reasons for the invention of the IUPAC International Chemical Identifier. I'm going to assume you know plenty about this, but the significant thing is that it's layered. So here's your molecular formula, here's your connectivity, and then you have layers for isotopes of stereochemistry and fixed hydrogens and so on. If you hash it and produce the Inchy key, these 14 characters refer just to the connectivity, including tautomerism, these stereochemistry and isotopes, and so on. I'm assuming you know lots about Inchy. If you don't, I can give you some references. Another system you may be familiar with is the chemical structure lookup service, which is supplied by the National Cancer Institute, computer-aided drug design group. It uses the cactus hash codes from Wolf-Dietrich Ihlenfeld's company. And these hash codes look a little bit like this. F stands for fragment, I stands for isotope, C for charge, T for tautomer, and S for stereo. And U stands for unspecified, none of them, right? So this one is, if you like, the sort of connectivity, because it's not sensitive to either fragments or isotopes or charge or tautomers or stereo. The one the chemist would probably prefer is this one, which, if you notice, the U relates to tautomerism. So this one doesn't distinguish between the tautomers. And there is actually a long paper by this team in the Journal of Computer-Aided Molecular Design issue that I mentioned. Okay, here's a definition of tautomerism, a fairly general one. Different companies may have a slightly different range of atoms, but basically your middle atom is one of probably of these. M or Z, the two end atoms, are usually trivalent N or bivalent those. I think almost everybody would agree on that. Not everybody can do keto-enol tautomerism. That's where one of the end atoms is a carbon. Chemical abstracts, for example, doesn't really do keto-enol tautomerism. Most people would allow deuterium or tritium to migrate. Chemical abstracts allows a positive charge to migrate. IDBS allows a negative charge to migrate, and if they want to tell me nay tonight, well, I'll buy them a drink, but that's what they tell me. And obviously, this system, I've just done 3 atoms, but it can be extended, and it can go into rings, and there are complexities with aromatics, and there's complexities with stereochemistry, and so on. Here's a fairly straightforward example of 1 3 shifts, 1 5 shifts, 1 7 shifts. But companies like Cambridge Soft say there's no limit. You can do 111, 113. A lot of companies stop at 111 shifts or less. Right, here's a slightly more complex example. My thanks to Jonathan Breacher. This is a tautomer of that. This is a tautomer of that. But that and that would not normally be recognized as tautomers by the chemist. For this reason, Cambridge Soft maintains that only 1 3 shifts are acceptable in keto-enol tautomerism. IDBS recognizes 1 5 shifts, and so do a lot of other companies. ACD Labs, as a matter of interest, actually this isn't phenol, but ACD Labs only recognizes major tautomers. When it generates all the tautomers for you to choose from, it actually doesn't give you minor tautomers, so they're sort of in between the two. Right, Jonathan Breacher of Cambridge Soft provided me with lots of examples, which IDBS supplied me with some other examples, and then OpenEye kindly ran all the Cambridge Soft examples through their software, and if you want to see the comparison in detail, you can read the paper. According to Cambridge Soft, there's no reason why you should stop at just this level of unsaturation. Why not include this? So this type of tautomerism, Cambridge Soft recognizes. ChemAxon and OpenEye do not. Ring opening tautomerism, phenolphthalein is the most obvious example here. I'm sorry, previous. Cambridge Soft and OpenEye would reckon, yes, this is tautomerism. They don't recognize it. ChemAxon would probably tell you that they're not sure their customers even want this recognizing, but it's an interesting tautomerism example. Here's another one. This is where Cambridge Soft and ChemAxon start to disagree. These are, the proper name is fluxional structures. Typical examples, Bolvalian. Cambridge Soft calls this valence tautomerism. They don't recognize these structures, even though they're genuinely tautomeric. OpenEye also doesn't perceive this so-called valence tautomerism. Can you still hear me? Okay, right. Okay, these two are really mesomers. They're really sort of valence bond representations. They're not tautomers. So they should have the same key, same code. And in fact, they do have the same inchy key. A NEMA key is what ChemAxon uses. That's the newly extended Morgan algorithm that ChemAxon uses. And you'll notice these two actually have different NEMA keys, which is, to the chemist, not technically satisfactory. But that, in fact, does happen with most software vendors, alas. It's partly a consequence of the way tautomerism is defined. Now, you'll notice here, the tautomers have the same inchy key, which is desirable. Again, you would expect the NEMA keys to be the same, and they're not. Unreasonable. I'm not sure if I did that explanation well. Talk to me afterwards if you don't follow. These are what are called unreasonable tautomers. You don't expect carboxylic acid to do that or a nitro group to do this. But in fact, Cambridge Soft reckons that you must recognize this because some idiot might enter that. And if they do, you need to recognize this. It's a good argument. OpenEye certainly recognizes both of these as tautomers. ChemAxon deals with this one, but not with that one. Okay, let's get even more complicated. You can have multiple overlapping tautomeric systems. So 5 can turn into 6. 6 can turn into 7. 7 can turn into 8. So in theory, 5 and 8 are tautomers, even though 2 hydrogen atoms have moved, not just 1. Interesting argument, this. ChemAxon says this is a load of nonsense and it's pushing tautomers to the limit, and 5 and 8 are not isomers. Well, they would say that because they can't do it. OpenEye generates... Oh, God, you're recording me, aren't you? Scrub that. I didn't say that. OpenEye generates a full set of 68 tautomers in this case. Whichever structure you put, it's reentrant, the OpenEye algorithm is reentrant. Whichever one of these you put in, you'll get all 68 tautomers. This one was from IDBS, and it's another overlapping example. IDBS will recognize that and that as tautomers. ChemAxon says if you put that one in, they will recognize that one and that one. But if you put that one in, it won't recognize that one. And they are now realizing perhaps they should fix this. They're actually planning to change that. Okay, so there's some detailed examples just to show you the complexity of the subject. So how does it affect registration? Well, how you register compounds depends on why you're setting your database up. If you're doing a corporate database or a stockroom database, your main interest in life is having some representation of the molecule that makes sure somebody doesn't synthesize it again and cost you money if you're a farmer, or somebody doesn't buy it from Aldrich more expensive than from somewhere else because the wrong tautomer's in there. So they don't really care about energetics or anything. They just want to make sure they have a unique representation of phenol, so you buy the cheapest version or you don't resynthesize it. If you're predicting spectra from a structure, quite different. You must have the correct tautomer if you want the correct NMR spectrum. So you might want the NMR spectrum of an unusual tautomer. So your objective is quite different. Reaction mechanisms. It's quite common for the reaction to go through a tautomer that is not necessarily the stable tautomer if it's sitting in your corporate collection. So ChemAxon would recommend that you record the reaction mapping as is, even if it's got an unusual enol in it, and then you record the product and the educt and the product separately according to your tautomer rules, so you have the best of both worlds. And at the extreme, and I'm sure this is very unusual, but if you were working in an ultra-low temperature laboratory, those tautomers are actually different substances, so again, you would have a different objective. Okay, so what are your options when registering? Well, one is to enumerate all the tautomers and store all the tautomers. Another is to calculate the canonical tautomer and store the canonical tautomer. And then the question is, which canonical tautomer should you store? The energetically favorable one, we come to that in a minute. Enumerating all tautomers, I told you earlier, ACD labs, when you put a structure in, will give you all the options, except that they rank them. They don't rank them on the same sort of scoring algorithm as Accelerate. They rank them as major, minor, and conditions dependent. And if it's very minor, they won't even give you the option, apparently. So they tell me. Or you could allow the user, they allow the user to choose which form to store. In fact, most companies will allow the user, when they see all the tautomers, choose which one they want to store. Schrödinger is unusual. I pick on Schrödinger because they are what I call at the other extreme. When I communicated with them, they were extremely helpful. Every email I sent them, they sent me screeds of stuff about how wonderful their software was. It was all totally unrelated to what I was trying to write about. It started, you must start with EPIC, our wonderful PK algorithm. You must have proteins. What we care about is the ionization state because the ligand docks in there. Don't care. That wasn't what I asked them to do. So I sent another message and back. Our mindsets were just not the same, right? So they enumerate all energetically reasonable tautomers. They enumerate all energetically reasonable ionization states. They store all these tautomers. They store all the ionization states. They do have a product called Canvas, which is their Chem Informatics product, and there they can, if you like, be ChemAxon-like. But they refer to what ChemAxon or the standard database companies would call, they refer to us as quick and dirty. As far as they're concerned, a molecule is an energetic thing. It has energetics, it has electrostatics, it has shape, it docks. They just have a different way of looking at things, right? And they do actually have a canonical smiles if you wish to do what they call the quick and dirty. This little piece of logic was supplied to me by chemical computing group, and Daylight, I think, will also use the same procedure. If A and B, you want to choose, you're looking at A and B, are they tautomers? If A and B are identical, then clearly you accept them. Right? If the total number of hydrogen atoms or charges isn't identical, obviously you can reject. Then you look at the heavy atom skeletons and you reject if they're not identical. Now at this stage, 1-butene and 2-butene are the same. They're not tautomers, but they're the same because you're just looking at the skeleton. So if you want to do tautomers truly, you then have to enumerate all the tautomers for A, if N is the same as B, except. Enumerate all the tautomers for B, if N is the same as A, except. And otherwise you reject. This seems a fairly logical sort of routine. I hope you will agree. Once you do all this, I'm sorry, no, I've got one more slide here. This is, for those of you who want to read up on this, these are the more common algorithms that are used for enumerating tautomers. This is the so-called Salem-Delaney algorithm. It's used by OpenEye. It's used in the PubChem database. And sadly, not published, like many well-known things, like Inchi, not truly published in the literature yet. Everybody quotes a Euromug meeting from 1999. Presumably, it must be documented somewhere. This one is the Cactus algorithm, which is used not just by Cactus and the US government and PubChem and NCI. It's also used by MOE, CCG's MOE. And a really up-to-date one, this is how Schrödinger does it best, so they would say. Okay, which tautomer do you store? And here's some concepts. Generate all the tautomers. It is generally agreed that it is impossible within, how am I doing? I started about 1:30, did I? We're okay. I mustn't miss these ChemAxon slides. You have to have the ChemAxon slides. Okay, we're okay. We got like quarter of an hour? 10 minutes? Oh, that's okay. We're doing fine. We're doing fine. I could even slow down. So it's generally agreed in normal range of time and computing power, you are not going to calculate the lowest energy tautomer, right? So the sensible thing is to use a set of rules for consistently generating a tautomer. Works the same every time. And then some companies were going to say, if you're going to do that, well, you might as well try and get a low energy form. rather than just do it on alphabetic smiles or whatever, then try storing the low energy form. Store it, and most people probably would store it as canonical smiles. The other concept, again, generate all the tautomers, and again, you recognize it's impossible to calculate the lowest energy, so store them all. Ans would say, Schrödinger, store all the protomers as well. Now, this is not unlike the case of the conformers. When we used to do the 3D searching many years ago, there were the companies who said, store all the conformers, and there were companies who said, we don't want all that storage space, so we'll just store the likeliest one, or one that represents the best range of low energies or whatever. Here, there is the argument, do you store all the tautomers, or do you store just one? Acceleris would tell you to store all tautomers. Daylight probably has a preference for that. Moe, Schrödinger would tend to store all the tautomers, because storage space is not a big problem nowadays. Okay, structure search. As I said, exact match is only the same as the novelty checking we talked about earlier, and it's usually done by what Simics would call flex match, or by doing canonical smiles or matching hash codes, some sort of quick matching procedure. Flex match is referred to, different companies have different terminology. ChemAxon tends to use the word generic structure, or generic form, which I don't like because there's confusion possibly with Marcouche. Some people will talk about normalization. Some people call it sigma skeleton. Some people call it just the connectivity, but I think we understand what we're doing. Substructure search is slightly different, because if you've only got a substructure, it's going to be hard to perceive all the possible tautomers, because they will depend upon the fixed region around the substructure, which you're not being given. So to generate all the tautomers for a query is not likely to be possible, though you can make an attempt at it. Okay, so what about approaches to substructure search? Well, one is to address the problem at registration stage. If you store all the tautomers, regardless of what query you put in, you're going to find all the tautomers. It takes storage space. Actually, let's go back. It takes storage space, but Schrödinger and the other companies like Acceleris will tell you, you've only got to do it once, of course. Once when you generate the database, you generate all the tautomers. You don't have to keep doing it. So the only problem really is storage space. Or you can address the problem at the search stage. So you can enumerate all your database structures on the fly rather than storing them. Or you could enumerate the query structure with the problems that I explained earlier. You can't do that perfectly. Or it's a case of caveat emptor. Now, there's a Latin scholar here, I know, because I had dinner with him last night. It's not caveat emptor, it's caveat searcher. And what is that? No, you fair. What a shame. IDBS has been so helpful so far, and it can't do Latin for me. Never mind. Or you can do a combination of methods. Or you can ignore the problem altogether. Now, that sounds silly, but in actual fact, if you're running an internet database engine, you may have noticed at the beginning I had CWM Global Search, I had Chem Spider there. To some extent, you do have to ignore the problem, because those databases have been built by somebody else. CWM Global Search is searching a whole load of databases federated on the internet by putting in an INCHI or a MOL file or whatever. They have no idea what rules the people used when they registered those structures. So in effect, they have to ignore the problem. It has to be a case of caveat searcher. Okay, and we finally come to what do you show? You found a hit, what version of it do you display? Do you show the input registered structure, the thing that the guy drew in the first place? Do you display the tautomer that actually matched your query, even if it's not the one that's stored in the database? That's probably quite a good approach if you're going to do substructure highlighting within the if you highlight the query structure within the whole structure, this is quite a good approach because it's clear where the match is. But in fact, both Cambridge Soft and Cactus do not display the match structure, and they still manage to do the highlighting on the registered structure. So Cactus points out your highlighting might look a bit odd. The most common, incidentally, and the one that ChemAxon recommends, is to display the input registered structure. OpenEye reckon it's best to display the standard form, but that could be because their system has registered the standard form anyway, so they are actually displaying the registered structure. But OpenEye claims that this is the form that their users prefer to see. Or you can let the user choose which he wants. That's if your software is tailorable, the user can choose what he wants. I should have pointed out earlier on, there are toolkit companies, and there are companies who will supply you things out of the box. And a company that specializes in toolkits inevitably gives the user more scope for deciding what he wants to do. One other little point worth mentioning, if you've got experimental results, I've got 5 minutes? That's great, yeah. If you've got experimental results like an NMR spectrum or whatever, it would be very silly to show one tautomer with the NMR spectrum and another tautomer. Okay, now we're coming to the bit that you've all been waiting for. How does ChemAxon do it? And delighted to say that afterwards, somebody's going to tell you how they really do it. I'm told there are 4 approaches. One is to normalize the structure. That's what ChemAxon calls the generic tautomers, and I would prefer to use a different term. But another one is to allow for tautomers at search time. Another one is to choose a preferred tautomer. And then they've got Standardizer, which allows the user to choose his preferences. Incidentally, ChemAxon also addresses the problem of aromaticity and of stereochemistry and other features that are affected when you start running an enumeration algorithm. The Tautomerism plugin generates, you can either generate all the tautomers or the dominant tautomer or the canonical one. And by dominant, I mean the one that is thought to be energetically the most favorable. They calculate the canonical tautomer by empirical rules. They try to make the canonical tautomer the dominant one, insofar as is possible, rather than just choosing an alphabetic smiles or whatever. And as I said, handles dearomatization. Right, then the customization. If you're going to choose the dominant tautomer and you want to do this yourself, you can set the operating pH. You can set a maximum distance. That's the number of bonds that the proton can migrate. That's the 11115 that I mentioned earlier. You can protect certain structural features. You may want to keep aromaticity. You don't want to change carboxylic acid groups or nitros, quite possibly. Some of this is an ongoing work, Sables tells me. They're putting stuff in for esters at the moment, or when I spoke to them, they were working on esters, I gather. And you can exclude unstable aromatic compounds. Okay, ChemAxon software normally stores the canonical form. You can store all tautomers if you want. It enumerates query tautomers as far as possible, and they also pointed out to me you can't always do a perfect job there. It usually displays the structure originally input. After a search, it usually displays the one that was registered, but you can optionally display the standard tautomer if you want. And finally, am I about right? Some final observations. I wanted to divide the companies up, I think, into groups in the way they tackle this problem. So you have your computational chemistry companies, of which I showed you probably slightly unfair. Schrödinger is at the extreme. You ask a computational chemistry company about tautomers, and their reaction is, does the ligand match the receptor? That's their interest in life. They talk about ligand preparation. They talk about PK algorithms. If you ask them, can you handle keto-enol tautomerism? They don't even really answer that. They supply you with a list of rules, and they say, well, our rules just look at atoms generally and look at bonding, and then they don't think in terms of, is this an imine, whatnot tautomer? They use energetics. They're interested in energetics. And they try to take rigorous approaches insofar as it's not possible to do quantum mechanics or whatever. Informatics companies have a different approach. They're not matching a receptor, right? Their interest is, can we match it in the patent? Is this something our competitor has made or whatever? So more practical approach. They're building registries and inventories. They don't really care very much whether the thing they're buying from Sigma Aldrich is highly energetic or not. They're just buying a molecule, right? And the easiest way of finding what they want to buy is what matters to them. They're using graph theory. They're not using energetics and bonding types and so on. They're basically using the graph of the molecule. If you ask them, can you do ketoidal tautomerism, they will, like Jonathan Breacher, supply you hundreds of examples of exactly which tautomers they can handle. They're taking very pragmatic approaches, so you could do financial decisions. Do I buy this? Do I make this? Etc. And then I come to what I will call a hybrid company. And I put this in particularly because there are a few companies who I think sit rather interestingly between the two, and ChemAxon is one of those. If I had to do the others, I think ACD Labs is possibly a hybrid. OpenEye, I think I would put under the computational. Obviously, MOE, Accelerist, Schrödinger, computational. The typical informatics companies, definitely Symix, Cambridge Soft, probably IDBS too. And I'm not trying to say anything against these people. There's nothing wrong with any of these concepts I've given you. It's horses for courses. It's what are you trying to do? What are you trying to achieve? ChemAxon has an advantage of being supplying tools as well. I mean, okay, they've got instant JChem. They will supply you something out of the box. But they're a toolkit company, so they have a flexibility to fit into either category. And they do actually have algorithms that will fit into either category. Symix doesn't do PKA type software. So that's my kind of conclusion about ChemAxon. I do have to give some thanks to a lot of people who worked with me on this, all 28 vendors, all of whom sent me all sorts of ideas, including ChemAxon. ChemAxon, without whom this presentation would not have been possible, one, because they invited me, and two, because they supplied me an electric lead a few seconds notice last night, which I was very impressed with. I managed to break my wire in transit or something. Jonathan Breacher, I don't know how many of you know Jonathan Breacher of Cambridge Soft, a guy who is very interested in this sort of thing and sent me mounds and mounds of structures and ideas. Jeff Skillman of OpenEye, who was probably slightly, I guess I must have upset his work schedule in January a whole lot because he had to run all these examples through OpenEye and send me tables and pictures and smiles. And Russ Hillard, who drew those far too complex slides near the beginning for me, but I did ask him to do it. Keith Taylor, who answered on behalf of Symix. And of course, all of you for listening. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Wendy. I'd like to open the floor for a minute for any questions that you have for Wendy. Yes?
Just a quick one. What about the other approach, which is just to highlight something as a tautomer and kind of ignore it after that? Because, I mean, for a lot of companies, they may need to know they're making a tautomer, but it may not be particularly important for the chemistry they're doing.
I don't quite follow you. You're saying just mark it as my...
So basically you want to detect that you've got a tautomer situation.
But you don't care what's registered. Actually, that's another point I should have made about ChemAxon. I think ChemAxon... Well, let's do it with OpenEye. OpenEye marks the fixed parts of a molecule and the tautomeric parts of a molecule. So that if you are doing all the matches all the time, you don't need to match the fixed parts, you only match the tautomeric parts. I believe that ChemAxon does that as well. Is that what you're talking about, where you just mark within the molecule, this could be tautomeric? This is a
tautomer, you're drawing a tautomeric molecule. Yeah,
I mean, that's tantamount to what I'm saying. You just mark, this part could be tautomeric, just mark the bonds when you record it. Don't do much more.
It's kind of an alert for the chemist as opposed to actually handling the situation.
Yeah, could do. That's almost like an ignore the problem thing, but it's slightly better than an ignore the problem.
You know you've got a problem, but you're not going to do anything about it.
Yeah, that's almost the sort of internet search engines. I'm told ChemSpider as well would like to do rather more than they do at the moment. Again, they're a depository database. And they just record the first structure they get. They have to, and they're looking more into, can we do the standardized INCHI version instead?
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, great.
Thank you so much. That's the most technical paper I've given for quite a while.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Well, it was quite fun to do chemistry rather than business.